Hey everybody, thanks for joining us again. Today we're talking about developing student leaders. I'm here with Mark and Mariah, and we are excited to have this conversation today. I want to start off, we're hitting this topic about student leadership, developing student leaders in your ministry. And I think it's important first to talk about why is that important? Why does developing student leaders in youth ministry matter? Why is it important? Mark, let's start with you.
Sure. A lot of the stuff that we have been talking about as it relates to discipleship is talking about a replication sort of process. It's a people process. So if our desire in discipling students is that they would live a life of discipleship as well, they need to think about people. Well, guess what happens when you think about other people than yourself? You become a leader. Whether you want to or not, you're leading people. You're influencing people. And so it's important to start thinking through what does it mean to have student leaders, because they're going to be influencing people one way or another. And so we want to develop those skills. We want to provide opportunities for them to practice and live those things out, because if they're going to become a fully formed disciple, they need to recognize they're going to be leading people, and they're going to be modeling and helping their peers figure out what does it look like to be a follower of Jesus as well.
Yeah. I think that the teenage years are really crucial times where students really start to know themselves, see some of the giftings they have, and want to be able to use that. You see that all over social media. They're taking anything that they like to do and putting it out there. So I think that elevating them to have some type of thing that they do on a Wednesday night or on a Sunday morning or anything like that allows them to take that little gifting and use it and feel seen and heard. Yeah. And all the time you get to walk with them and say, hey, you're glorifying God in that.
Yeah.
So it's a good way that as they're learning more about themselves, they can use it for something that God would love for them to use it for.
Yeah. And one of the key hallmarks of Gen Z, which is where the students are in their youth groups right now, they're producers. Right, that's one of the terms for the Gen Z. So they're making things and they're creating, and a part of that is leveraging that in leadership, finding ways in which they're showing what does it look like and influence with their friends. But they're also, one of the hallmarks of Gen Z is that they are responsibility takers, right? So they recognize I'm a part of the solution, and whatever the problem is, where do I fit in and how do I do it? And you can use in a lot of healthy ways. You can leverage what's kind of their default mode of this particular generation.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I love that. The idea of getting students to really connect and believe is ultimately wanted them to have ownership in what they're part of. We don't want them to walk away thinking, oh, that's their youth group. We want them to walk away thinking, this is my youth group. Yeah. And that's going to lead to them bringing friends. That's going to lead to them wanting to continue to be a part of it and lean into the relationships that are there. So I think you guys did a great job of kind of laying that out. So if we know why student leadership matters and why it's important, let's kind of get into the nuts and bolts. Is how do we do it? How do we create student leaders? Because sometimes we can overthink it. We think it has to be this elaborate leadership program, right?
Yeah.
What are some ways that we can create leaders in our students? Mariah, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I think it's looking at all your gatherings and what you do with a typical student on a given event or a given night that you have with them, and start to just find little ways that you could use them versus a staff, or maybe things that you would do all the time is an easy thing for a student to do. Yeah. Like if you had a welcome committee that they have to check in, have your student run that welcome committee.
It may be better than you, right?
Yeah, right? It gives them just ownership right at the door. As you get deep into your size or whatever your group looks like, you can have them start to do announcements, or have them do the greeting, the opening game, or if you have a worship team, allow them to lead worship and allow them to be used in that way. There are just so many different things that you would typically do for your service that the students also could too. And it might not be, hey, go do this. It might be, hey, I'm leading this game. Do you want to do it with me? Do you want to be the person that calls out the stuff? I'll teach the game, but do you want to do this part with me? So you're teaching them how to do that stuff. So eventually they can just do it on their own, but they're going to do it with you. And then that kind of opens up a door for one-on-one stuff too, is because they're doing it with you.
And that's how Jesus called his disciples, right? He said, come and follow me. And they watched him, and they saw the way he did things, and he would explain why he did things the way that he did and why things were happening the way that they were. And students recognize, like, there's they pick up on those sorts of things. And so one, it de-intensifies the moment. If you're come and serve alongside me, come do it with me, it's fun for them. And then you get to explain the why behind the what in a lot of things that you're doing with your students as well. So bringing them along, I think, is a great way to start.
I love what you highlight too. Like, it can be little simple things. It could be, hey, I'm doing the whole game. Maybe they don't want to run a whole game, but it's like, could you pull the ticket out of the raffle?
Right.
Or, hey, we're doing a small group. Would you mind at the end? Could I ask you to lead in prayer?
Yeah.
Right. Like one little piece, and you build upon that. And I think that's awesome.
And I think it's important to recognize there are different types of leadership skills and different types of leadership personalities as well. I know for me, a lot of times my default mode is to look for the exuberant, the loud, the kid I can put in front, and the the really extroverted personality. But that's not the only type of leader it is. So don't pigeonhole yourself into only recognizing one certain type of leader, but look for leadership skills. And one of the key things that I think we've said is that idea of who are our influencers. And some of your influencers are not always the loudest kid in the room, but a lot of times we think those are our leaders because they draw the most attention. But influence does not just come because of volume.
Yeah. This is great. There was a conversation that we've had. There was a connection between leadership and discipleship. And I was thinking about this as we've talked so much about discipleship and youth ministry, and how do we connect the two, whether it's doing small groups or one-on-one. So could you guys give us maybe a few ideas or some thoughts that you had on the connection between student leadership and discipleship? They're not the same, but they seem like they're really, there's really a connection there. So what are some things that you guys think about when you think about that?
I think that when you your focus is to disciple a student, they're talked about in another video of that fruit that gets born. So as you start to brew that, and the students, things start to click. They understand who Jesus is. They understand who the Holy Spirit is, and they understand the excitement and the mission that He has called us to. They're naturally going to want to do things that we categorize as leaders. They're naturally going to want to go out and tell their friends and bring their friends. They're naturally going to want to answer those questions during their small group or pray over their friends. So I think that the root of good leadership is good discipleship, because you can have a student that is a good leader, but if they're undiscipled, who knows what their fruit is going to look like? They might have some bad influence in there that could destroy the group. So it has to go hand in hand. Doesn't mean that you don't want to diminish students if you're like, oh, they're not ready yet in discipleship. No, you still walk and still work with that student, but it has to be your goal that both is equally there, because that fruit does matter. The why behind everything really matters.
That's great.
And when we think about when we think about the process of the whole beholding, believing, and becoming piece, if we're trying to get them to look like Jesus, then it means turning your focus from self and turning it out, right? And it's living on mission, and it's seeing people, and it's seeing the lost, and it's the first shall be last, and the last shall be first, and I'm looking for opportunities. It's why a lot of youth groups, as students get older, if they don't make that pivot from in to out, they've done all of the games before, they've heard the same stories before, and if it's still me focused, they start to see that this isn't for me any longer, and there's no reason to continue to come. Whereas if I can get a student to start thinking about going with a mindset of serving or an opportunity to love somebody else or make someone else smile. I would say all the time, I've said all the time, it's one thing for an adult leader to have a student, hey, come sit next to me who's sitting alone. How much more beautiful, how much bigger a deal is it for that student for one of their peers to say, hey, you can come sit next to me, right? There's longevity there, and they're inviting them into it, and they're modeling the same sort of thing.
Yeah, I love what you hit on about leadership is ultimately about serving.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. Be careful, when you're building, this is not about glory, right? This is not about who is the pinnacle kids. This is about serving, and the partnering with discipleship comes in so strong. Where pick those moments, like you said, if it's picking up chairs, there's not a lot of glory in picking up chairs, right? Or hey, can you pray at the end? Or can you invite your friend? Or could you lead this small group? Things like that speak to the discipleship process, I think, are great.
That's good.
Shifting a little bit to the last thing I want to ask you guys is, there are definitely some potential pitfalls when it comes to student leadership. And I'd love for you to share some of your experience. What are some of the things that we want to try to avoid when developing leaders and students?
One of the things I think in any religion or spirituality, so to speak, is that I think it's just our hearts. We love checklists, and so the unhealthy thing that can potentially happen in that is that we begin to create this hierarchy of Christendom or being a good Christian, and it's badges that we begin to collect. And so sometimes with good intentions, you're trying to leverage leaders and trying to promote certain students, and what it can begin to create is this spiritual pride or this spiritual arrogance or a hierarchy of their faith. And I think if you're not communicating what leadership is, especially the service piece of it, then you can start to create an unhealthy hierarchy. Yeah. I remember in some groups that we've had in the past, like there was this pride that was starting to develop in the student leadership team, and this kid was picked to be a part of the student leadership team, and this student wasn't. And I would have parents that would come to me and be like, "What do you mean my kid's not a part of the leadership team?" Right. And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, it wasn't like this." But that's how our hearts work, right? Because we're looking for validation, and we're looking for and then it's feeding all of the icky stuff in us, and it's amazing how the enemy can just get in there and just start really pushing all those buttons. So just be really aware of whatever you're communicating about leadership is not a spiritual hierarchy.
Yeah. And you don't even have to create an official student leadership team.
No, exactly.
You don't have to say anything about it. You're just intentional about giving opportunities. Yeah. Mariah, how about you? What are some of the pitfalls that you've seen?
Yeah, I think that when you have student leaders, you get really pumped because there's always needs in ministry. Like, you need more people to do things. Yeah. So what I would try to be cautionary on is that you don't give all these tasks to students and now they're not being the ones that you're ministering to. You're called to minister to those kids. Yeah. Don't put so much pressure on them to be doing this ministry life with you that they are still the people you're ministering to. So there might be times where they be like, "Hey, I can't come tonight." It's okay. Like, you can't rely on them wholeheartedly that your whole ministry now falls apart if they can't serve in that capacity anymore. So it's just reminding yourself who they are, even though they are being used in such great ways, and they could even be leading people to salvation within their group, but that's still your job to make sure you're ministering to them. So just finding a good balance, finding other ways. If they're really serving a lot on a weekly service, how are you meeting with them one-on-one? Are you seeing them in a small group, ministering to them, allowing them to just be real and not on, so forth, stuff like that, just to make sure you provide opportunities for them as well.
It's kind of the Jesus model, right? Like the higher level or closer circle of disciples, the more time he spent with them. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And it helps them not feel guilty in those seasons where they can't serve or they can't, because like the hierarchy thing that you're talking about, I just kept thinking about serving doesn't make you closer to God. Yeah. Jesus' blood is what draws us near to the Lord. Like, that is it. It doesn't matter how much you're doing one thing, drawing near in another way, how good you pray. That isn't what keeps you close to God already did that. Jesus already did that. Right. What it does is just helps him go forth in his mission. Yeah. So just to kind of reflect back to that of why we serve, and make sure we're teaching them that in good, healthy ways. That's great. Versus them thinking, I need to serve because I really want to be close to the Lord. I really do. Yeah. I hear that.
Then it leverages that approval idol, and we're we've undone everything we've just worked for, right?
You got to be very careful about that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thanks guys so much. We want to encourage you. Hey, start creating opportunities and moments, and maybe a practical challenge for you would be start writing down a couple of things, maybe 3-4 ideas that you could engage your students to become more of a leadership role. Doesn't need to be big, doesn't need to be this huge process, just a couple of practical things. And this week, this month, this year, try to implement those. Thanks so much. We'll see you guys on the next one.